Hello and welcome to ISI Insiders, the flagship podcast of vibes. Doesn't matter what you're doing, we can vibe it. Coding, vibed. Cooking, vibed. Surgery, okay, well, not that. But podcasting, we can vibe the podcast. And here on this podcast, we get a chance to go inside of ISI, the now famed and 50-year-old Information Sciences Institute, to meet some ISI insiders. These are my colleagues, friends, co-workers from across the Institute, doing a range of crazy cool tech and science work, and I aim to better understand their what, their how, and their why. That is what they're doing, how they came to be doing it, and why. With their ability to go anywhere else, tackle one of these really important questions: why these? Why here? Why now? And why might we care? Hi, I'm Adam Russell. I'm the director of the AI division at the University of Southern California's Information Sciences Institute, or ISI, and I'm your podcast host. And along with Nina, the Wonder editor, I'll be serving as your virtual guide as we talk to some of these ISI insiders. Because I think talking to the folks doing the work, and not just the people talking about the work, might give us a better sense of where things may be headed, or at least where these folks think we might be headed, as well as where they think we should go and how we might get there. So today we're going to be diving into the world of the human domain, by which I mean that place where weird AI and humans, yes, us and our own weirdness, particularities, our complexities, end up commingling. And it doesn't take a lot of math to understand that weird times weird equals weirder, and wonderful, and dangerous, and toxic, and promising. And well, this is why I'm an apocalyptimist. So to help us dive deeper today, my guest today is Maxyn Leitner, a research assistant here at ISI, now a PhD candidate, having just passed the comps, congratulations, and has done a bunch of work at this human-AI intersection. Maxyn, welcome to ISI Insiders.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam.
Well, I really, again, appreciate it, especially since you should be out like partying like a fiend, having passed your qualifiers. But before you get into the deep work of PhD, this is an unfair question. There are many on this podcast because I'm used to dealing with people who are much, much older than you are. And so I like to take them back in time and ask them how they would describe what they do to their sort of 12-year-old selves. You look like you're about 12 to me, so it's not really a fair question. But let's play along. Go back and talk to that 12-year-old self and explain sort of what you're doing and why.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, the problem is there's a lot of people on the internet who like to bully. I think the framework of bullying is really helpful here, and they like to bully through misinformation. So what I do is I train machines to try and better recognize the patterns of this bullying and this misinformation and how it spreads throughout a social network. What are the broader impacts in terms of how people are organized, who's getting isolated, and how densely knit communities of misinformation can lend power to this kind of bullying.
Gotcha. Obviously, no need to explain why that's important. Well, so where's the AI in this process? How are we using? I mean, one is AI can make this worse. AI can also make it better. Yeah. What do you think about that?
So one of the ways I think about this is in terms of content moderation. So this has been a very timely topic, especially recently, but for years now, we've seen on social media sites people who are trained content moderators experiencing all kinds of psychological harms. And it's a very difficult task. And there's a lot of content out there. And given the way our society is structured, one of the impulses to, okay, so we're going to underpay people. We're going to take people we're already exploiting, and we're going to subject them to these kinds of psychological harms. I can't remember who it was, but someone said that, without content moderation, the internet would be nothing but pornography and diet pills. But, as we've seen, it can, in a way, get even worse in terms of the extent to which things can go off the rails without robust content moderation.
How do you square the concerns that people have around like content moderation versus sort of free speech? Let's get deep.
Let's get into it. I mean, I think one of the things that I try to tackle in my work is not just this individual, like taking a look at a piece of content, something someone's saying as like an isolated node or bit of content, but how does it connect and how does it relate to everything else that's happening around? in a social network, in a community. Well, in particular, I'm focused on online communities, but of course, this also plays out in IRL communities. And I guess one of the ways I conceptualize it is we want to create healthy, robust communities. It's not just like, even if you don't believe that, maybe you think it's fine that trans people are getting bullied, but the patterns of misinformation and those structures that arise are actually unhealthy for cisgender people as well. Like the creep of that kind of bullying and misinformation spread doesn't end at one particular target.
Interesting. So it is the case that you sort of see it almost like a cancer, like it can grow bigger until you end up with essentially an online environment that's not really good.
Yeah, no, there's been a lot of work in social network analysis that's used the disease spread model as kind of a metaphor, or as a similar model in terms of how to conceptualize the spread of these harmful ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, that engagement's really interesting. How do you think about that? I mean, do you think you can actually stop, or do you think addressing the online spread is enough?
I'm not sure if I'd characterize it as enough, but I think it can make a difference, because we know that marginalized people tend to organize online in order to, share resources, whether that's financial resources or share information. There's a lot of community knowledge that's being spread. So if people are being isolated from each other, they can get cut out of that communal knowledge. And we think that's important. And also, isolated people are easier to keep isolated. That can have all kinds of real world effects, especially if you're a person who doesn't have access to IRL community, whether you're, a youth or
IRL is in real life.
In real life.
I just want to confirm that. Like,
right.
Yeah, I'm not that unhip. I can figure it out. Yeah, Arrow. I asked you to go back in time and talk to your younger self. Now I actually want you to talk to my two younger people that I live with, which are my little girls, who are walking into this world in which like these things are being perfected to grab people's attention, right? Ezra Klein recently talked about, we're just now getting a handle on this idea of social media may not be great for you, and we're about to get T-boned by AI, really, as a truck. Like it's going to, make all this so much harder to really understand and control. What advice would you have for me raising, sort of two girls in this environment of social media? Are there pointers that you think that we should adopt? Yeah. How should I raise them to think about this stuff?
I think I'm going to actually share a piece of advice that my partner shared with me as I was doing this research. I'm just going to take a quick PSA for everyone who's doing similar research. I think everyone who's doing research like this needs a therapist. Like, you need someone to talk to about what you're consuming and what you're evaluating in terms of like tracking these online, hate movements and whatnot. But the piece of advice that my partner actually gave me is like, okay, when you're at work and you're scrolling to try and get a sense of what's going on, every time you come across a piece of content that's really transphobic, that's, really specifically, trans misogynistic or, otherwise bigoted, I want you to make a tick mark. I want you to have a little journal and you make a tick mark and track up how many of those pieces of content you're being exposed to. And when you see a bunch of tick marks, maybe you like step away, or you intentionally go like watch some like cat videos, or, I think prohibition is a losing strategy. And I think the advice I'd give is techniques like this that kind of encourage both intentionality in terms of how we're engaging, and then also just kind of keeping lines of communication open, so that, your kids feel like they can bring to you, hey, I saw this on TikTok and it's, making me, feel really upset.
Yeah. The intentionality thing, I think, is really important. This idea that you can take this back. Everything is designed against you, but yeah, if you can be intentional, yeah, you have a fighting chance in some sense. I'm actually sort of optimistic that there'll be tools to help with that. One question I have for you is, in the face of that kind of complexity, one question I have for guests is, if you could have dinner with anybody, living or dead, who you think might have some like profound wisdom to help us think about this, who would that person be?
This is a tough question because I feel like I'm really lucky in that I've gotten to meet at least, a couple of these people already. But Dr. Alex Hanna, I know was previously mentioned on an episode of this podcast by Becca, but she's absolutely amazing. I love the work that she's doing. And I think a chance to sit down and talk with her more about some of these questions and where we go from here. I hope I get more chances to in the future. Also, Morgan Klaus Schurman doing very similar work.
Okay.
And someone, Dr. Fatma El Safori, postdoc at the Weizenbaum Institute in Berlin, who does work actually on how some of our bias metrics are themselves biased. And
it's biased all the way down in some sense, but although obviously some things are more biased than others, right? So I started this by talking about myself as an apocalyptimist because I am aware certainly of how wrong this could go and is going in some cases. But I also see there's reasons to be really optimistic. Help me focus on the optimistic for a moment. Give me three things that you're most optimistic about with AI.
I think in a way, I'm most optimistic about the kind of results of the criticism that we've seen AI, particularly generative AI, getting, because I think it's actually a really important opportunity to reassess and develop AI that's in line with our values and really be explicit about what we're valuing. So at the risk of going controversial, recently, I think it was OpenAI released this image generation tool that would take a photo and recreate it in the style of Studio Ghibli. And this is totally against the wishes of the studios, Hayao Miyazaki himself, and it's appropriately gotten a lot of pushback. And I think one of the interesting things that this can illuminate for us is this incident actually forms a mirror in terms of what, broadly speaking, we value and what we don't. And we have the opportunity to say, do we want to continue in this way? So particularly with respect to art, I think there's a lot of people who value the output, but certainly not the artist as a person and the process that it took to create that art. The arguments I've heard is, oh, AI is making art more accessible, but it's making art objects more accessible. It's not making the process of you yourself creating art more accessible. And I think this actually forms a really good opportunity for us to point at that and see very explicitly, right, these are where the values of this thing lies that we've created.
What would you be doing if AI did not exist?
Wow. Yeah, I guess some of the things I'm already doing. So, art making.
What kind of art?
So I'm a Taiko player. It's a Japanese art form. In particular, this we call it kumi daiko, so group taiko. It's a communal drumming form. It has actually a really strong history in the Japanese American community here in the US and in other places like South America, Brazil, Argentina, and now it's kind of spread all over the world. But yeah, I'm part of that artistic community, specifically here in Los Angeles, and interacting with people.
So I realize the answer to my question is not, well, I would drum for the rest of my life.
Right.
But
yes.
But art. Do you find that that group drumming has influences how you actually do your own academic research and the work you do?
I think so. And in the sense that, when we're getting together as a group to compose, to create art, we really value the process. And I think Taiko is really interesting as an art form in that it's music and dance, and we ask ourselves, what do we want to communicate? What do we want the audience to feel? And how do we get there? And how do we train our bodies to be able to produce that? So it's not just about the end product. The process to get there has value in and of itself. Yeah, I think that does influence how I think about AI in terms of avoiding this, what is the output? What is the thing I get at the end versus, right, what is the integrity of the process
That's no, that I mean that's powerful, and I think I'm gonna chew on that one for a little bit because I do intuitively agree that the focus on the process versus just the outcome, is important in sport. It's important in team building. It's important in our lives in a very real way, like working with my kids and trying to emphasize like you're learning these things. It's the learning that's important. It's not the actual, final output. And I think actually it'll stand you in good stead as you do your PhD, which is very much a lot of process that hopefully isn't just judged solely by the outcome. How do you keep up with all the literature and the explosion in this area? AI, computational social science. I mean, it's daily, it seems like. So do you have any pointers or tips for an old brain like mine to sort of keep up on it?
I think the question of what it means to keep up is an interesting one that I think one piece of advice I'd give would be to interrogate that, because I feel like sometimes we exist in this space of FOMO, fear of missing out, right? Something new came out. I have to understand it immediately. And again, it can come from that like results oriented thought process of I need to be at the state where I
Hmm.
understand this as quickly as possible. And I think it can create a really anxiety ridden existence to like, I have to jump around to every particular new thing that comes out. Whereas I think just giving ourselves the space and time to process things, to say, okay, I know there's all these, there's, DeepSeek, there's new frameworks for models, there's, new bias metrics. Actually giving ourselves the time that it takes to understand these things and giving ourselves the grace to understand that it's going to take time to process. And I think that leads to a deeper level of understanding.
So you mentioned earlier that someone recommended that everybody working in this space needs a therapist. I feel like you're my therapist right now, in a way, like in all honesty, and not in a bad way. I don't mean that condescendingly, but yeah, sometimes it is true. You need someone to give you permission to like not know everything all the time, if it means that you're also giving up understanding in a real sense.
Yeah. And I think that kind of trying to tie it all together in terms of when we talk about these conversations around what does AI value, what values are we embedding in AI? A lot of times you have this question of what can AI do for us? And I think implicit in that sometimes is what things can we designate to AI so we don't have to think about them? We see that in terms of like text generation and, for schoolwork and coding. And I think there's this really tempting pill in signing away our agency, again, in that results oriented thinking of
Mhm.
like, we can offload this and then we won't have to think about it.
Yeah.
But I think that we're going to find, and we are finding that that ultimately constrains us. It constrains us into these modes of exploitation. It constrains us into these kinds of interactions. And
Um,
I don't know how to work this in, but I actually had one more answer to the person living or dead that I could, if I could have a conversation with. It's actually Dr. Marquise Bay, who's at Northwestern University, and they do really awesome Black trans feminist studies work. And one of the things they said on a podcast that they were on that really stuck with me was, I'm asking people to be more free than they want to be. And I
yeah.
think that is a deeply embedded challenge within the question of where AI goes and how we interact with it. So,
Yeah, no, on that, I think that's that kind of challenge I think is really worth highlighting. And I think yeah, the people who think like just offloading the AI is going to solve our problems, I think we are appreciating that it actually not only does it not solve the problems, it creates more problems in a very real way. So we talked about valuing the process, not just the outcome. As you embark on your PhD, again, that will be a fascinating process. I'm a big believer in focusing on that because ultimately my vision is that we end up in a we realize the best of all possible future worlds. I don't know if I'll ever get to enjoy that outcome, but certainly myself, being an ISI, you, our colleagues, I'm appreciative of the fact that we are part of a team that can believe that there's a process towards that outcome and that process matters. Well, we're right out of time, Mazan, but thank you very much for taking some time out of your PhD studies and your work, and really appreciate your candor and your expertise.
thank you.
All right. Well, if you enjoy these short podcasts, please do really what only you can do. We actually do want to be graded. We do want some feedback because we're constantly looking to improve the podcast. It's part of our process, not just the outcome, as we've been discussing today. Please also subscribe, spread the word, send us, feedback, questions, and of course, most importantly, perhaps, is we'd love if you just keep listening and keep learning. And then join us again for another future episode of ISI Insiders, where we're going to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep humanizing tech to help navigate our way through this weird world. Trying to do what humans can do best when they face these kinds of challenges, working together as if all our lives depend on each other, because they do. So for now, and for the future, fight on.